Here's the drill. I will do a prayer of gratitude for everybody, and then for all of us. And then we will do a brief review of what is energy healing for those who are new to this process. Then we will do a review of yesterday's session, because yesterday's session, today's session had the same title, Energy Healing for Digestion and Metabolism. However, the second session today tends to build on the foundation set yesterday. So we'll kind of review some of the foundational steps from yesterday, and then we'll dive into today's session. And I'm looking forward to reviewing some of these, giving answers to some of the fantastic questions that came in, and giving some useful information to everybody. And through the collective integration and of intention of our healing collective, together we can do some really powerful, really useful healings for digestion, for the digestion of everybody participating, and to whatever degree that can be picked up at the collective level and offered out to the collective, that would be wonderful too. So that's the intention for today. All right, thanks for being with me. Let's go into the prayer. Thank you to the source of creation for being everything, for being us, for being our dear ancestors and their vital role in the presence of the physiology and all that we inherit from them in the way of habits and ideas and behaviors and everything. Thank you to the eternal tradition of wisdom for being the link between the absolute and the relative, for being that aspect of consciousness that bridges the unmanifest to the manifest. Thank you for the opportunity today to work concisely and efficiently, to not say or so, but to start sentences strong from the beginning. And also, of course, to do work which is useful and vital to everyone, and to empower everyone here with the technologies and the information required to be really great energy healers ourselves. The intention is that we all have the potential to use energy healing to address all kinds of situations and circumstances, symptoms, etc. And may we all have the wisdom and the capacity and the courage to use those tools to support our own highest health and success and well-being and progress towards evolution. All right. What is energy healing in a nutshell? Energy healing is the process of focusing attention. I gave a very different definition yesterday, by the way. Everybody gets recordings of today and yesterday. Even the new people get recordings. But yeah, energy healing is using our attention. And attention is consciousness, it is perception, and we're focusing it like a laser into the areas, into the seed or the source of the illness. We want to get right into where the cause of the illness, the symptom is on the surface, right? But from the symptom, we kind of follow that back to its seed, and we get into the seed of the illness, and focusing awareness on the seed brings consciousness to the seed. And consciousness in its essential form is wholeness or completion. So almost always the seed is an expression of something incomplete. That's a pretty much the basic description of what is energy healing. We need a couple things for that. We need a navigational map, because we need to know how to get from the symptom to the seed. And it helps a lot to have a lexicon or a language to describe what we're experiencing, because the seeds, if you had access to them right from the start, you would have already solved your problems. But yes, but we don't have access to the seed from the start. If the symptom's there on the surface, it means we haven't found the seed yet, and we haven't addressed it effectively yet. So we need to get in, we need to have a map to figure out how to find the seed. And what we find is when we go diving into the deep fabrics of consciousness and looking for the seed of illness, that's a very interesting abstract world inside the self. And so we need a language to go with it. Of course, with all deepest reverence and gratitude to the ancient civilizations of our world, which evolved languages to describe a lot of the really subtle mechanics and structures of the field of consciousness. We're drawing a lot from those traditions. I'm drawing a lot from those traditions, particularly the Vedic tradition, very, very ancient tradition of knowledge and understanding, and integrating a lot of those terms with English, but also in some cases, I'm using terms that I have coined myself in order to describe things that otherwise English has no words to describe. And I will include with the links on this webinar definitions of some of these terms from my knowledge base, because as most of you know, I have a free knowledge base and it does include descriptions of a lot of these terms. I realized from one of the questions that came in, though, I haven't yet done a blog on Ojas. So we need to talk about that a little bit today. Even though we talked about it quite extensively yesterday, we will do that as part of the review, which brings us to the review of yesterday. So yesterday's session was probably one of the most heavily theoretical sessions we've ever done, I think. Almost completely kind of leaning on the theory part and not so much on the actual healings. We did a few healings. We did some healings for the organs that are kind of like the fiery organs of digestion in the middle of the body. And we did some healings to upgrade the body's ability to metabolize efficiently and to deal with mucus and how we deal with mucus, and bringing a balance into the body's mucus production so that it serves the body most effectively and doesn't clog up the system. All right, and then there were healings that engage the heart, and there was even a healing for Dharma, as I understand. So that's kind of a review of yesterday's healings. Theoretically speaking, a really deep and amazing question came in from Canada about the role of Soma and Ojas. And I did want to just put those two energies, and Agni was in there. Those are those Vedic terms again, guys. Agni, Soma, and Ojas. So just a quick review. Agni is fire. Essentially, we can say the word Agni translates to the word fire. Of course, all these terms have their very subtle reality, and then they have their denser, grosser reality. So on my knowledge base, there's a heading for Agni, and in there is more of a, I would say, manifest description of the role of the digestive fires in the body and how they organize out. But Agni, in its most essential form, as described yesterday's webinar, is the friction that is created deep, deep down. Here's our bubble diagram. I have probably a diagram I can pop up on this. Oh, I'll just do it. I think I can do it. I'm going to be giving you guys a bunch of different backgrounds today anyway, so I may as well get started with all that. I wish my little diagram window here would let me change its shape and give you larger and smaller versions, but it doesn't. So it is like that. Here we go. All right. So this is one of the navigational maps. This is a navigational map. And in this particular navigational map, what we have is the denser, more concrete levels of the physiology down to the very, very abstract, unmanifest level of self. And I count these two levels down here at the very, very bottom as the before manifestation level of creation. And between these two layers of creation, there is a little friction. There's like a little wave. There's a little wave that goes back and forth like that between them. And that little wave creates a little bit of friction. And this deepest one, it's very hard with it. I've just got a green screen here. Okay, resting silence is oneness. Oneness, wholeness, one self, but just kind of holding in its own nature. Dynamic silence is where that oneness has awakened to the fact that it is. It's like, I am, this is I, and this is I am. So the bottom one's I and the upper one's I am. And when that wholeness awakens to its own nature, it divides into these three values of knowingness, knowing itself as knowingness, knowing that it is knowingness. And so there are these threes. There are three. There's knowingness, knowing itself, and then the object of recognition of knowing, which is itself. So three values. And so back and forth it goes. And in there, a friction is created. Friction's created, and that's Agni. And that's the foundation, the source of Agni. It also creates a kind of a hum. It creates a kind of there's an action that's taking place there. And from that action is born Soma. Soma is born of that. So Soma's actually born deep in the silent womb of the source of creation as the effect of that hum. Ojas, on the other hand, we're putting everything in perspective here. Going up to the other chart. I think is it this one? Yes. Yes, okay. So what happens is Agni then interacts in the physiology, in the digestive process, and the food has to face the fires of digestion. And the first fires, there are 7 fires of digestion, and the Agnis sit between these levels, these types of tissue here. These are all different types of tissue that evolve out of the digestive process. And there's one up at the top too, because you start with the food. Okay, so put the food up at the top there. So then there's the food, and then it gets metabolized in the first layer of Agnis here, and it comes up with the first flow of dhatu, the first tissue of the body. All right, so I'm kind of standing in front of these. I'll stand on the side. Okay. Soma and Agni are present in every part of this process. But here at the end, there's one more layer of fineness that the food undergoes. And at the very end, that finest layer of fineness gives rise to Ojas, which is not really physical material so much. It's more in the junction between physical material. Yeah, one person here in the audience is saying it's like light. It's it's so fine that it can't really be measured with objective measuring instruments as physical, and yet it can be measured. Vajas can measure it with the combination of touch and consciousness. They can measure how much Ojas is in the body. And we can think of it a little bit in the same category or the same type of material as like attention. Because attention is also one of those materials that sits in the gap between material and non-material, right? Because everyone's had the experience of, oh, somebody's looking at me, and then you turn around and realize, oh, somebody is actually looking at me. So did they touch you? No, they only touched you with their attention. But the attention, even though it can't be like measured physically, is physical enough that you feel it. Oh, somebody loves me. You feel their love, right? So so Ojas is in that same range of manifestation as attention, that it's like right between. Therefore, we can think of Ojas as being a little bit more, Ojas ends up coming out as an unmanifest reflection of the unmanifest nature of Soma and Agni. And think of it like a flower, okay? Right now, at this time of year, we've got a lot of daisies blooming. That's the type of flowers that are blooming at this time. And daisies remind me so much of the sun. They're so happy and they're so bright. And so what happens? The sun shines down upon the earth, and the sun gives all this life force to the earth. And then the plants grow up and they're like, I want to be just like the sun. I want to look as much like the sun as I can. If we have a garden just full of flowers, and what the flowers do all day long is they face their little faces to the sun. So when the sun's in the east, they're facing the sun. And when the sun goes over to the west, they face to the sun like that. And all day long, they keep their focus on the sun, which they love so much, and they look so much like the sun. So Ojas is like that to Agni and Soma. That Ojas is the byproduct of the interaction of Agni and Soma in the physiology through the process of creating tissues. But it ends up being the finest, most closest to being expression of material or tissue that we produce in our bodies. So Ojas looks a lot like that. It's very, very subtle. It's very beautiful. I hope that helps for people put that a little bit in perspective. And by way of review from yesterday, where we talked about Ojas and Soma in a lot more detail. And also that space, that dynamic space in which Agni is created as Marut. So thank you for that amazing, awesome question from Canada, which ticked off that whole field of exploration. All right. One of the things that came up after we finished the webinar, I always enjoy inviting local people here for the webinar, and often questions come up afterwards, which helps. It's like a self-referral process for me, because it helps give me some feedback on how everything went out to all of you. And one of the points that came up was a very important fundamental point on the relationship between digestion and consciousness, which, please forgive me, I do this so much, I kind of took it for granted and I didn't even mention it. So it's worth mentioning, because all the systems of the body, I actually kind of talked about it in more detail yesterday, in broken down detail, but I'd like to give you the overview today, and that is that every system of the body, every organ of the body, every function in the body reflects being, like the daisy, right? Reflects the sun, same thing. Our bodies reflect divine being in their very nature. And they self-interact so beautifully, all the different expressions of being. So I talked yesterday about how the fundamental nature of being is to fold in on its own nature, right? It folds in on itself, and through its own self-referral loops gives rise or creates the foundation by which the whole manifest field emerges. So the digestive system, and at this time checking in with everybody's digestive system, because it's good for us as our collective too to kind of have that focus, that we're resting with that deep intelligence of the body which oversees and administrates the digestive function. So the energy healing begins when we start the focus. Digestion. It is a physiological means of processing experience. And what experience are we processing? We can, of course, point to our moment-by-moment experiences, but there is an overarching, universal, or you could say archetypal form of experience that is hidden within every experience. That experience, at its most fundamental level, at the level where we could say it's literally found in every single other experience that we have, is the deepest, of course, is the experience of pure being itself. But then just its first manifestation, we're just going to look at it at its first level of manifestation there. And that has been handed down through culture and tradition and generations upon generations as the hero's journey, which is a story that's been repeated eternally for as long as we have language, as long as we've had people on earth. We've been telling the story of the hero's journey. And the hero's journey is that story that describes the process of experience. And the digestive system, the story of the digestion of a piece of food is no exception. The story is still the same. So when we are faced with a challenging or difficult experience, it's really common to utilize the power of digestion, leverage that power to help us metabolize the experience. I don't know how many of you might have noticed that sometimes when things get dicey or rough, or when you go through a period where you're dealing with something which has been a little bit difficult, that, see, oh, I can't do that, it won't let me. Okay, there we go. We've been through something that's a little difficult. There's a tendency to eat some food that's a little bit extra heavy or rich, maybe extra concentrated in a particular material like sugar or something like that. You know, you go through a difficult time, and different people, of course, respond differently. Some people, when they're under stress, they have difficulty eating, and that's when things are really, really stressful. We have more difficulty eating, like the loss, like a death in the family, and the person's like, I can't eat. is just too upsetting. But a lot of experiences that aren't quite at that level will result in processing the emotions through the digestive process, through the process of breaking the food down. There was something I was going to say about that. Oh, yes. One of the questions that came up yesterday, very brilliant, was, well, that means if we can find a way to understand our experience so well, to master the field of human experience so effectively that every experience is bliss, then everything we eat will turn into bliss in our bodies. And I fully agree. And I think that's pretty much the aim of our session today, is to, along with the more fundamental focus, which is to embody divinity more perfectly like the daisy at every single point. That is definitely part of the experience, which I believe is why we did so much healing for the heart area yesterday. Oh, and that reminds me of the other thing I was going to say. Thank you, everybody. As long as we're talking about the hero's journey as embodied through the entire digestive process, yesterday we went into quite a bit of detail in the upper digestive area. So well begun is half done. So we did a lot of healings for the upper part of the digestive system. And one of the points that came up was that this area in here, which we kind of think of as sort of the heart area, before we get to the organs of digestion, before the tools of digestion come into play, enzymes, hormones, stomach acids, before those tools are engaged with the food, up in this area, I was saying how this is the part of the hero's journey where the hero he's been out on his own for a little bit, and he's blessed by the presence in his life of like a teacher or a guru or somebody, a wizard comes by and gives him a magic amulet or something like that. That's this part of the hero's journey, is right up here. And what I realized, because we think of that, I mentioned thank you to the holy tradition for being the eternal tradition of wisdom, for being the link between the absolute and the relative. Well, what happens up in here, of course, is respiration. And respiration is the expression of universality and individuality. Respiration is where we massage the connection between experience of self is universal, the air is out there, it's all universal, doesn't belong to anyone, comes in, is personal, it's individual. And it becomes the value in the air, the oxygen in the air, and the water in the air, and all the materials in the air that our body uses become part of our self, right? And then we give all that back to the universal again. So each breath is a massaging of the relationship between individuality and universality, whether a person consciously realizes it or not. The usefulness of consciously realizing it is this is energy healing. Energy healing is attention focusing clearly so that we are aware, we can appreciate the divine structure of the physiology and its role. Because if the lungs fall ill, or if one has, say, asthma or allergies or some sort of also autoimmune disorders come into this area, then we know that we're following from the symptom down to the seed, right? That what we're doing is we're seeing, well, the underlying principle in this area is my relationship with my universal level of self, with the eternal self. So yeah, that helps for the use of the body, we could say, is the implement to support the use of inference for analyzing what the symptom is communicating. The body's communicating all the time our next step of evolution. And it communicates sometimes through discomfort. Okay. So yeah, the hero's journey. So the hero's happy in his happy home and is feeling well and complete and whole and lovely. And then it has to go, oh, surprise, it goes on the journey and it goes, first step is, oh, it's not my happy home anymore. Things are not okay. I have to break down my own sense of who and what I am and become something different. I don't know what that's going to be. So the first thing that happens is a lot of alertness, because when things are going as expected and then all of a sudden they're not going as expected, you have to go into hyper awareness mode. And that's what happens in the mouth. You can review some more discussion on that from yesterday. And then through this process, the hyper alertness becomes finer, 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 until we get to the thyroid, and the thyroid is inner awareness. The role of the thyroid is to monitor the whole inner digestive process and to determine where more support is needed, where less support is needed. So the hyper awareness becomes very, very fine till it gets to here, and then we go into guru space. And this is the guru's, in a sense, it's kind of the guru space. There are probably, I would say, different connections through Jyotish, because in Jyotish I know the planet guru represents the thighs, among other things. So there are other ways, there are other angles we can look at it, but definitely that bridge between the absolute and the relative is represented in a nutshell in the respiratory system. And also the heart is here. And the heart gives us our deep inner wisdom and our connection to the fine level, oops, right there, the fine level of the navigational field, the causal body where all the healing mechanisms reside and emerge, where they're stabilized. I'd say the foundation, we'd say everything emerges from the absolute, but the foundation for implementing the healing process starts here at the causal level of the physiology. Okay, so healing emerges. How the body deals with the food, because the same food in one body can be a blessing and in another body can act like poison. And here's another thing, is very interesting, and I didn't really get a chance to find the exact reference on it, but I will look around and make a note for myself to find the reference and send to you guys if I can find it. But my dear cousin sent me a couple of years ago a scientific research study that had been a statistical study that had been done on potlucks. Anybody attended a potluck lately? Yeah. So summertime, it's a good time for potlucks, at least here in the US, it's summertime. In the Northern Hemisphere, those of us. So it turns out that at potlucks, people on the average tend to consume thousands of calories more than they consume at a regular meal. And that's because there are just so many lovely choices at a potluck. However, it's also been shown that the body metabolizes those calories completely differently, and those calories do not end up putting weight on the body if you consume them at a potluck. We should just always eat at potlucks. So we can eat all we want and never put on a pound. And my husband and I actually had a slightly similar experience because we went out to California to visit his dear mom last week, and we were just eating at restaurants and going to all kinds of fancy places, and both of us were thinking to ourselves separately on the way home, oh wow, I'm gonna get on the scale when I get home, there's gonna be an extra 10 pounds there. And guess what? It wasn't at all, not a single pound. It was just, it just metabolized differently. And it was like a 10-day vacation. Like that really literally, I mean, the difference between the way I ate on vacation and the way I ate at home was completely different. It literally should have killed me. And it didn't. So why? Because we were with family. Basically every meal was a potluck. And also there was, the whole system was functioning in a very kind of relaxed and vacation mode, right? And as a result, the whole system functioned more efficiently. Okay, so how do we can that? How do we capture that? We want to capture that every day of our life, even when it's a work day or even when we're not at a potluck. So the answer came out of the last webinar. We started in on this answer, but guess what? Since the last webinar, I have been looking more deeply into the mechanics of the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems, because there's a lot of potential in there that we can access and apply right now. So the difference, oh, I wasn't going to say so, sorry. Okay. Anyway, the difference between sympathetic and parasympathetic is that the sympathetic nervous system is the fight or flight or freeze nervous system. And that's the one that kicks into gear when some dynamic action is required. We don't want to get rid of it. We need the sympathetic nervous system, but we need it to work for us in the moment, in the short term, to bolster up or boost up the energy flow so that we can move forward with precision and dynamism and correct action. We need Dharma established in the sympathetic nervous system so that when the sympathetic nervous system kicks into gear, actions are spontaneously in accord with the laws of nature. The parasympathetic nervous system is rest and digest and reproduce and heal. And so one of the beautiful points that came out from the last webinar was that when the parasympathetic nervous system is engaged, we are in healing mode. Is anybody at all surprised to know, this comes from a science article that was sent to me after the last webinar, thank you to my dear spiritual brother in England, that the parasympathetic nervous system, I can't remember what the article said. No, it's coming back, sorry. The parasympathetic nervous system engages more in children than in adults. That when we're children, no surprise there, right? That children have the parasympathetic nervous system running on max most of the time, and just once in a while, as needed, a stray dog runs into the yard and starts barking, then sympathetic comes on, and then they run into the house like that. But most of the time, parasympathetic nervous system is running. So the research study showed that in middle-aged to elderly people, if the parasympathetic nervous system was engaged or was activated, and in the case of the science experiment, it was activated through electronic stimulation, that the individual body, after a very short period of time, would show signs of anti-aging, reversal of aging. So I'm like, oh, okay, this is good. This is good. So my thought was, why buy a device that you put in your ear that gives a little electric shocks to your ear? Oh, diagram coming up right here. Okay, why would we put that in the ear? Here's the reason. I should have that. Oh, that's a new diagram I just put on here. Okay, so here's what happens. The parasympathetic nervous system is overseen and administrated by the vagus nerve. And the vagus nerve, vagus means wanderer, vagus nerve, it runs through the whole body, and it starts up in the head area, and it runs down, and it attaches to all the different organs. Unfortunately, this diagram, I didn't have time to resize it before I put it up for you guys just now, but you can see that there are connections to different organs in the body like that. So the vagus nerve runs deep, deep inside the body. However, there is one spot on the body where the vagus nerve comes right up to the surface and can be accessed through the skin, and that's here in the inner part of the ear. So what that means, that's why they put the electrodes in the ear and they stimulate the vagus nerve from there, and that stimulates the parasympathetic nervous system. So my thought was, I don't want to put electrodes in my ears. It's not my thing. But I can cut my fingernails and I can give myself a little ear massage. So I experimented with this for about the last 3 weeks since our last webinar to see how that works. Because, right, if the electrodes can actually cause reversal of aging by stimulating the why not? In fact, here's a cool tip. We have hand chakras, right? We have energy centers in the palms of our hands, but we also have energy centers in the tips of our fingers. And an electrode doesn't have chakras. It's just sending, right? It's just sending electrical impulses into your poor little ear. However, when we physically, with our fingers, stimulate this part of the body, we can stimulate with the consciousness, which is in the tips of the fingers as well. So we're not just massaging physically, we're massaging energetically as well. So I experimented with that, and here's what I discovered. Certain parts of the ear are more, I experienced more bliss when I massage certain parts of the ear than others. I think I'll use my pencil as a pointer. One of the things I discovered that was along these cartilage ridges, along these ridges, like where these points are for the different organs of the body. And also deep, how can I do this? Deep in here, in this area, this is also a calcium, no, excuse me, a cartilage, little bit of cartilage here, but also inside the ear, actually right in there, all around that opening right there is very like sensitive to the bliss of the massage. I get my thumb in there and massage right on there, and it feels so good. So I started discovering that if I massage the parts that feel more good, that was having a better effect. The other thing I discovered was after doing the massage for like a minute or so, by the way, you should know the experiment that was done, they had the electrodes in the ear for like 15 minutes. That's a long time, folks, to massage the inside of your ear. I'm sorry. I mean, I'm trying to massage my ear, but 15 minutes is like, oh, it's like an eternity. It's just a small area. So we don't want to rip up the skin, right? So, you know, I was just like a few minutes. And then what I discovered is if I massage more lightly, then I'm massaging more with the energy of my consciousness and less like physically massaging. So you can do a whole range from a more deeper massage where you're really touching the tissues up to a very, very light, just energy massage. Just energy massage. Just massaging the etheric part of the ear with the energy chakra that comes out the fingertip. All right. Then I noticed that the effect after about a minute of massaging the ear was very profound, and that with almost, I'd say it takes about a minute or so after the massage finished that my body settled way down into a deep healing mode. Therefore, I recommend do not do this massage if you're driving or or operating heavy machinery. Better to do the massage when you have a little time to rest after the massage, because that was my experience. Was the stimulation was so powerful, and it activated the parasympathetic nervous system so powerfully that my whole body just went into like a deep parasympathetic mode. The beauty of doing this is that it has cumulative effects. Not only is the healing effect of being in the parasympathetic mode healing itself, but the body starts to create a habit of being a little more in parasympathetic mode and a little bit less in sympathetic mode. Any women who've been through the change of life know that you go through this period during the menopause where all the things that kind of used to make you feel kind of soft and luscious and sweet kind of make you feel kind of nervous and edgy, and you know, the adrenal glands kick on, and it's like that's a period of time where there seem to be some physiological functions that sort of push the body over into more of a sympathetic mode, more of a fight or flight mode, which is kind of a natural evolution from raising toddlers, right? Where at the beginning it's like, oh, the baby's so sweet. And it's like, oh my gosh, they could get in trouble this way, or oh, they could get hurt that way. And so then one goes into that fight or flight. And then that whole thing, when they finally get big enough that you're not afraid of them jumping off, accidentally falling off a cliff or something, or running in front of a car, then at that point, menopause kicks in, and the sympathetic process just continues, right? Yeah. So, so anyway, this reverses that process. May it serve you well. May it be easy. May it be something that you love and brings your body back into a state of deep, deep healing on a moment-by-moment basis. All right. Thank you, everyone, for bearing with me with that one. We'll go back to our pretty background, I guess, if I can find it. It's been a while. Oh, I've got my box in a bad location, so I can't find. I could just pick a different pretty background, I suppose. There we go. That's good. All right. All right. So that's the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system. That's the technique for reversing aging. May it serve everyone well. All right, let's go ahead and look a little bit at some of these questions. Oh, because the questions really tie in so very nicely. Oh yes, yeah, this one particularly. I'm just going to take a drink of water, guys. My bottle's green. Okay. All right, so this point came up that a lot of people experience fear in kind of their gut or in the stomach area, and one of the really powerful points from last night is that the experience of giving away one's personal power is associated with a slowing down or a lack of digestive fire. And the digestive fire, as we know from the our inference through the hero's journey, the digestive fire represents those tools of consciousness, tools which we address the evolutionary transformation process, because that's what the digestion is. The hero's journey is a metaphor for the process of evolutionary transformation. Let's just review it very briefly, and then we'll go into working with some of this fear in the gut, or in the third chakra area. So the prince, since I have my prince with me, the prince leaves home. And as he journeys along, not only does he receive tools necessary for his journey, but he also loses what he thinks of as himself. It's not, and we can associate that with ego, right? Small ego is lost, but it's not that small ego is actually lost. Small ego has to expand. What the prince thought of as himself is a nice, complete, whole thing starts to stretch out and become broken down into smaller and smaller particles. And as it does so, it's no longer holding that unique space. It's starting to stretch out and kind of shape itself according to the shape of our digestive system, our alimentary canal. And that process continues along to finer and finer degrees of breaking down, until eventually not much is left. At the level of cellular metabolism, it's just consciousness. You've got molecules which have a certain quality of intelligence within them. And these molecules, the intelligence within these molecules is so pure and so simple that it cannot be discriminated from the consciousness of our own bodies. And at that point, the food becomes the body. And that happens, according to that last chart that we were just looking at, we see that that's a process of continuous refinement. Maybe I am going to go back to that chart. Sorry, guys. But since I've got the charts, and it does help, I think, somewhat. There we are. Is that it? Yes. All right. So a little loop of evolution happens between each of these points. And that little loop of evolution engages the values of Dharma, which we talked about more extensively in previous webinars and yesterday. But the 4 pillars of Dharma to review are truth, purity, letting go, tapas, non-attachment, and orderliness, satya. And at each point, what happens is the food comes in contact with Agni. And what Agni does is it breaks the food down, and then the parts of the food, this is the letting go part, the parts of the food which are not useful for the production, say we're right here creating blood plasma in the body. The parts of that food which are not useful for the blood plasma are separated out from the parts which are useful. And the part that's separated out comes into 2 categories. One is, well, this isn't useful for making blood plasma, but it's still useful. And the other part is, this is not useful for my body at all. So 2 qualities. And the one is let go. This is not useful for my body at all, is let go, and it becomes waste material in the body and eliminated. And the part which is, this is not specific for blood plasma, but it's still a very refined, very useful material, is passed on to the next level. So part of the food material goes into the structure of the body, or we can go, say, here to the blood. Part of that material goes to the blood cells and feeds the blood cells. And part of that material is passed on to the next level down, to the muscle. And then the same cycle repeats. So discrimination is there. That's truth, right? Using truth, like we have to understand the material that we're working with. Letting go is involved. Orderliness is involved, because we have to get qualities of the food, the values into their different categories. And I'm sure compassion is also involved. That compassion is, this is so, thank you all. Always more insights when we're together as a group. I'm so grateful to you. Compassion comes into play in how the body absorbs the nutrients which it needs for the particular material that it's producing or that it's nourishing. Acceptance and self-love are essential components in the tissue's ability to receive and integrate the nutrients from the blood or the nutrients that are coming to the cells. Self-love, from the very earliest days of my webinars, self-love has been one of the key focuses because we know that the body can really heal itself most effectively when we are completely self-accepting. The self-love process is complicated in the human condition. I always thought, well, when I realized as a young adult that I didn't love myself, I was like, well, why don't I love myself? I mean, I thought everyone would just be born naturally loving themselves. They have loving parents. Why don't they love themselves? Like my parents love me. Why don't I love myself? It didn't make sense. And what I realized was the complication in the human condition is that taking a human form focuses awareness and attention into the material structure of self. And the material level of creation is so fascinating, and it's so almost, I would say, overshadowing to the finer senses of, or the finer sensory capacity in the physiology, that we don't tend to make connections until we're a little older between ourselves as an individual and our universal or eternal self. Even as a child, and I had great experiences as a child, guys. I mean, I had really cosmic experiences when I was little, but those experiences were not verbalized very well. They were experiences, they were a bit overwhelming sometimes, and I didn't have explanations for them, and I found that they weren't experiences that I could easily discuss with my friends or with the adults that I knew. And so as a result, those experiences were not as useful to me as they were when I got older. Particularly, exposure to Vedic science was very helpful because Vedic science has words that describe lots of those really fine experiences, and that was allowing me to create order out of the chaos of those very abstract experiences. But the ability to really truly love oneself is founded on the ability to appreciate one's connection and union with divine being, basically, with the source of creation, with eternal self. Because if self-love is only directed at the superficial expression of self, then it becomes narcissism and selfishness and vanity, and that's no good. But if the person goes the other direction, is like, well, I don't want to be narcissistic and vain and selfish, so I just won't love myself. Well, that's also no good, right? Because because then it's like we're not in a position, we haven't positioned ourselves to be able to take the care of the physiology and the heart and mind in a way which is necessary for maximum evolution. So both are necessary. Both are necessary. We need to come from a position of such balance between those two polarities that it's possible to open a flow of exquisite and profound self-love. And at the same time, I need to move this just a little bit here. I'll just move it up like that. There, now it looks like I'm looking at you. Sorry, it looks like I was looking at your shoulder. Anyway, details up here. Speaking of which, speaking of taking care of the relative, right? That we're able to do that, then we're able to do that. We're able to take care of the relative in a way which is truly balanced and not overly attached, right? But not under attached. So this is saying that what we're doing is we're combining as a tool, and this gets into the beauty of matrices, by the way, which I'm seeing for everyone, a download of the Dharma matrix, and I'll let you know where that's landing in just a minute when I actually see it and finish describing. What we're doing is we're making a tool out of the two pillars, truth and letting go, truth and letting go, and orderliness. We're making a pillar out of those three, and then that pillar is talking to the pillar of compassion. So that compassion is modified by the combination of truth, non-attachment, and orderliness. And when compassion is modified by those three values, then compassion comes forth in a form which is unfettered, is unrestrained by boundaries that are created by natural law to keep everything in order, essentially. If a person's self-love is out of balance, either they're not loving themselves enough, then they fall ill, or they suffer neglect or deprivation. Or if the person is loving themselves too much, then the people that they know and love end up suffering from those effects. So what this does is it puts together the flow of self-love so that self-love acts as and that's the compassion pillar, right? Self-love acts as an implement or a tool to strengthen, integrate, and bind together one's big eternal self with individual self. And it supports the very delicate expansion of ego from individual ego to cosmic ego, to Brahman, to the ego of Brahman. That is an art form right there. So where is the Dharma matrix going? It's going to ego. That's where it's landing. It's landing at the level of mind. I'm seeing it, mind, intellect, ego on the, we can do this, on the, is it here? Yes. On this chart, Dharma matrix is sitting in the mental body and the emotional body, those two. And it's affecting mind, intellect, and ego. And the Dharma matrix, the level of the matrix, that fractal, and next time, guys, I'll put the picture of the fractal up. I was thinking I need to hire someone who does visual stuff because there's so many fabulous visuals, aids that I could create out of this talk. But MC Escher drew a marvelous, amazing, complex and orderly artworks. And one of them that he drew was a fractal in structure that had four values, like the four pillars of Dharma, that kind of nestle in with each other like that. And then they go, and then in the middle, they're big. So it looks kind of like a square, but then they morph into more expanded, expressed values of themselves, and then they morph to infinity. I love that guy's work. So that I'm including that diagram in the follow-up material that I'm sending you. But when I saw that diagram, I said, oh, that's what the Dharma matrix looks like. It starts out as the four standing firm in their unique positions, but then they start to combine in different combinations to fold into each other in order to influence or affect each other. And that's what happens in the Dharma matrix in our bodies. So everyone gets a download for that. And like I said, lots of entries on my knowledge base. You can always go and read more of that if you like. But that is I love the following of that. Okay, so brain explosions going on. Those of you who've heard of the Veda Leela, the Veda Leela is play. Leela means play. Veda means pure knowledge. It's a play about pure knowledge that describes in detail how one being folds in on its own nature to become multiples of itself, and how those multiples fold in on themselves to become greater multiples, and those fold in on themselves to become greater and greater, and until you've got this vast universe of diverse expressions of manifestation. Veda Leela. And one of the interesting things that happens in the Veda Leela, which actually happens in the way the Veda is structured, and the Veda being a body of ancient knowledge that is written, at this point we have received it in written form, describes that process of manifestation from nothing to everything, is that there's this 3-in-1 structure that I talked about yesterday. The one, how are we here? Oh yes. So the one being down here looks at the 3 right here. And so even though the 1 is 3 and the 3 are 1, you also get 4. There's also a kind of a 4 that appears because you've got 1 being 3 and 3 being 1. So there's 1 and 4, that 1 is the wholeness of the 3. And what the Dharma matrix I am discovering on the virtue of riding the waves of consciousness and wisdom produced by our amazing healing group is that the Dharma matrix does this in multiple combinations. Remember last night, the 1 was the truth pillar and then the 3 were the other 3. Now look what's happening today. The truth plus purity and austerity are combining together, and they're setting compassion in the position of 1. And the Vedas do that. Rishi looks at Chandas, and then Rishi reflects Chandas, and Chandas reflects Rishi, but then Rishi and Chandas get together and they look at Devata. These are the 3. Rishi, Devata, and Chandas are another name for those 3 aspects of knower, known, and process of knowing going on at the fundamental creation. Sorry, can't leave out those important details. So in the Veda, these 3-in-1 values, they look at each other. And Rishi, Devata, and Chandas are obviously looking at Sanghita, which is the wholeness, is the 1, right? And then they combine in different combinations, and they keep looking back and forth. And as they do, they become what they see. So then they start to understand each other in terms of their own nature. And that is exactly what's happening in the Dharma matrix. And this is illustrating this birthed from this particular webinar is very powerful, because what we've birthed here is the dynamic nature of the Dharma matrix, of Dharma. This is the dynamic nature of Dharma. It's the ability of Dharma to fold its pillars in on each other, and then they interact with each other in order to uphold and uplift a higher level of expression. All that's a lot to metabolize. All that is starting here. It's come to this part of the physiology. All my speaking was here at the sensitive. We're analyzing it and we're looking at it and we're constructing it. Our teeth represent our thoughts, among other things. So while I was crunching it up in my mouth, describing it to you, it was at this point. Now it's moved to this point. And now this information about the Dharma matrix being a living, dynamic structure where the 4 pillars have this ability to reflect upon each other and to combine together in 3-in-1s, and then look at each other like that. You could combine any of those 3, could combine in different forms to look at each other, right? It's a big download, and I'm feeling it coming into our collective and coming into everybody's physiology. Comes in through the crown of the head from eternal being, from the universe. It actually comes in from all around us. All around it comes in, and it's coming, and it's sitting right here, and it's just gelling. It's just integrating. It's getting stable and solid right in the center area of the being, the body. And I'm looking, as thanks to the discovery from last night, that we have the heart on this side, and then we've got a kind of a subtle, like etheric mirror reflection of the heart on this side. So I'm looking at how the 2 sides, that was another healing that happened yesterday, was an integration between these 2, the energy form of these 2 structures on either side of the chest, how they are handling or processing. The download is doing this thing where it's kind of like going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth at infinitely fast speed between these 2 structures for understanding. One understands more oriented toward the relative field of creation. The other understands more oriented toward the absolute field of creation. And what I'm seeing happening is the byproduct of this is creating a wave of joy or happiness that's coming up and landing right here on the thyroid. So this is definitely creating healing for everyone's thyroid. Yes. Thyroid's so important. Balanced thyroid that's strong and able to produce all those hormones that are necessary for optimal digestion in just the right balance. Just the right balance. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. And I'm just enjoying, I'm looking out into the field and I'm checking everyone's physiologies. I'm just checking everyone to make sure that this balance is coming into the thyroid in the highest and best possible way, that there aren't any blockages in any meridians or nadis, and there aren't any spots that are blocking. I am seeing for a lot of people, there is the sloughing off or the dissolution of discordant feelings. In some people's cases, we are dissolving beliefs, and in a lot of those cases, the beliefs have origins with the ancestors. God bless our ancestors for all that they supported us. And may they be free of limiting beliefs. May they be free of whatever structures they use to analyze their reality that cause them to feel unhappy. Because basically the underlying energy, the light medicine of this particular flow of consciousness is bliss. And if the aim of energy healing is to manifest physically, mentally, and emotionally, embody divinity fully, that also goes hand in hand with the experience of bliss, and this comes directly from Ayurveda, bliss in the mind, body, and senses. That means no pain, and that also means feeling good in the mind, body, and senses. Optimal health, optimal energy, upliftment on all those levels. It just feels so good. Maybe it's because we massaged our ears earlier that we're getting this great, healing now. I don't know, but it feels really good. Okay, I just checked our clock and I realized that we are definitely into question and answer time, and these completely awesome questions came in. So I think I've at least somewhat addressed the question. Fear. We did some healing for the fear that was in the middle area of the gut. This next question says that she missed last night, but she wants to know more about Ojas. I did talk a little bit more about Ojas today in context of review from last night, but for the lady who asked this question, I want you to know that the angle or perspective on which we discussed Ojas last night was a little different. I mean, it was like, I was setting a foundation, I think, to a certain degree. And I was also playing off of a question from a dear friend of yours who asked about Soma and Agni and Ojas. So going back and reviewing that would be great. So we covered that one. Oh, here's a really great question. Can you talk about, which I haven't addressed yet. Can you talk about the power of prayer before eating and its role in not only blessing the food, but aiding digestion? Back in the 1980s, I heard Maharishi say that transcendental meditation is the deepest and most profound form of prayer. I believe that's a direct quote. It stuck with me. So the moment that awareness falls into the source of creation, when one is sitting before one's meal or snack or whatever one is eating, one's bottle of water, quieting the system down. Okay, before I discovered the ear massage, I noticed that transcending also activates the parasympathetic nervous system in a huge way. In fact, I was thinking nothing activates the parasympathetic nervous system better than transcending. When we're transcending, we are in healing mode. When we're transcending, we are in rest and digest mode. So a moment of transcending tells the body that it's time to rest and digest. However, You've heard me talk quite extensively today about the Dharma matrix. Well, there are many, many kinds of matrices, many. And there is a matrix. And again, this is on my knowledge base, and I'm making a note to myself, so I send you more on all of this. So I want everybody to have everything. It's your homework. But don't worry, I don't expect anything. If it's useful to you, you can check it out. Matrices are, oh good, I'm glad I've got this one. Okay, matrices are comprised of consciousness at the astral level of the physiology. At the astral level of the physiology, consciousness looks like threads or streams. And when you put your attention on someone and they feel it, it's because a little, kind of like a little river went between you and them. That's how when I say, oh, I'm looking at everybody's thyroid, that's what I'm doing. Obviously, as I'm sending a little stream of my awareness out with the intention, I just want to check in with everybody to make sure everyone's doing great. So at the astral body, consciousness appears as streams or threads. These streams or threads of consciousness can form together into sacred geometrical patterns that are very orderly. And everywhere a stream crosses another stream like that at the node, there's an energy structure right there. So some matrices are very simple and some matrices are very complex. Just depends on how many nodes are required. And there is an energy matrix. It's shaped and formed like the Maitreya matrix. And if you Google that, you'll see what that looks like. All these sacred geometrical forms are born of forms created at the astral level of the body and of the astral level of creation, which we also call the web of life. All right. There's a matrix which is specific for the upgrading and purification and health of the food. And that matrix can be offered to the food in the prayer time before eating. And that matrix, what it does, every node in that matrix has a different effect on the food. You know, some of them purify if there are GMOs in the food, or purify out any lack of freshness in the food, and other values interface with your physiology to support the nourishing value of the food. And to align the food, basically what it does is it aligns the consciousness of the food with your consciousness. So when the food gets to that place, at each step of the metabolic process, the food is holding a space which best supports your consciousness and your evolution. The evolution, not just your consciousness as it is in this moment, but your consciousness as it will be by the time the digestive process is through at a higher level of expression. So you can look up the Maitreya matrix, and that goes on the food at the time of the prayer. Little intention. It's just the Mtreya. MAI. TREY. Yeah, I'm making a note to do that. Thank you. Yes, it's downloaded into the physiologies, and I didn't do it, being did it. But yes, yes, that's what we're doing. And on this note, I want to be sure I get to this other question. Thank you for that awesome question, by the way, so grateful. Okay. Why I don't have that other question, the one from England. I'm with you. No, here it is. Okay. All right, so this is a really important question. We have 5 minutes, so the last 5 minutes go here. And when I discovered it a few years ago, I was shocked and amazed at how many people actually have this imbalance. What it was that if she consumed anything with sugar in it at all, she would get an effect. And if at the same time there was anything in her diet that was at all fermented, or even like yeasted bread or anything like that, that the combination of the fermentation or yeast in the body with the sugar would cause the sugar to become alcohol in her body, and most of that was happening in the liver. Okay, I'm looking deeper, and here's what I'm seeing. The tendency to do this in the system is intimately connected with lack of self-love. Why? Because the energy frequency that's associated with alcohol is so utterly and completely destructive. It is almost on par. I would say another way of looking at the energy frequency of alcohol is death wish. That's another name. That we could give that another name for that particular energy frequency. Alcohol, death wish. And it's born out of habits and patterns. And in most cases, these are inherited. This is not an illness which necessarily has evolved from the current physiology, but has been gifted from the past, patterns and habits. And of course, this particular little anomaly or feature I'm seeing now deeper into it. I'm just reading into it as I go here. It's connected to a kind of a self-protective mechanism that is, it's connected to the self-protective mechanism that is behind the energy of alcohol. And that mechanism is even, I would say, deeper than the alcohol. It's not the alcohol itself, and it isn't the death wish energy of alcohol. It's actually a deeper energy that we've dealt with in other webinars that is responsible for the presence of alcohol and its effect on the human body in this world. It's a deeper structure that is clinging to the benefit of extracting or exploiting the value of being as it expresses through the human form. So that has a self-perpetuating, self-maintaining laws of nature that are sitting in that quadrant of creation. And that self-protection, self-maintaining nature allows or causes us to give it up. We've stumbled across something very big. What's happening is I spit it out, so I gave you the part that's mouth related, and now it's gone down into this area and it's rolling around down here in the understanding level of the physiology. Lots of discordant feelings are clearing off the physiologies right now. There's a big sloughing off that's taking place. Remember, what we're dealing with right now, this energy that we kind of came down to in the last moment, is old, deep, abstract causal body form. From the causal body, for those of you not familiar, check out the point on the causal body. I'm going to send you that one too. That causal body form has sort of garnered particular, very highly protective laws of nature into its structure. And so we're going to do what we always do. This is the whole principle of energy healing in a nutshell. We take that structure, we found the seed, which is not useful to our health and well-being, and we're relaxing it into the field of unmanifest being. It has to break down and become pure consciousness, pure being. Pure consciousness and pure being. This structure of creation as it exists within each of us, another way of describing it is the demon Kali that sits in the hearts of men, unseen and unnoticed in Kali Yuga, but is responsible for all the effects of Kali Yuga, which are unpleasant and make life difficult. So within these physiologies, everybody watching now in real time, everybody who'll watch anytime in the future, we're going deep into the heart and we're finding that seed, that causal structure, which is Kali, the demon Kali. We can talk of it in those terms, but it's really just a causal body structure. It's a way that consciousness has formed itself into a rather like a resonating space, so that when the vibration of being comes up and it gets into that resonating space, it resonates in a particular manner, right? And what we're doing is we're extracting the part of it that's self-maintaining. That we don't have to destroy the whole thing. We're just destroying the part that would sacrifice you and I for its own sake. That part that puts its survival ahead of our survival. And puts its survival ahead of our survival. Just dissolving that. It's just dissolving that from that structure. Because look, the destructive laws of nature are useful, right? We need both creation and destruction in order for this reality to exist in an orderly fashion. So we don't want to get rid of the capacity to clean the house, but at the same time, we don't want cleaning the house to be a form of self-sacrifice, right? That's the important thing. Yeah, allergies, right, exactly. And this is actually a great setup for a webinar on immune system. So seems like a no-brainer to go in that direction. But I always have to set up my webinars several months in advance, so I won't be able to add that in until later on down the road. But I just want you to know that the effect of this cleansing that we just did, the effect of this healing, I'm closing this, is creating, it's eliciting a response of love in the physiology, which is incredible. And that's coming in a very, very fine manner. It feels as if it's actually manifesting at a systemic level of the physiology. So before we kind of expect, oh, you know, if I love myself, I'm going to feel waves of love coming from my heart, going to the other parts of my being. And that's not what I'm feeling at all. I am literally experiencing that this value of love is coming from such a deep and profound, very abstract level, deep in the causal level of the physiology, that it is penetrating through every cell in the body, back in and making like a self-referral loop from every cell into the body, into every other cell of the body, to every cell to itself. It feels kind of like a tingling sensation going through the body. And of course, it's happening all the way down to molecular level and going to the ancestors as well. God bless our ancestors. So thank you everyone for being with me today. I took you a little bit over time, but I'm grateful for the opportunity to address that last question in at least a somewhat thorough manner. I see that a couple, oh darn it, 2 more questions came in here on my question and answer box. Thank you, by the way, everyone, for ever sending questions in the question and answer box. I do read them. Yes, hello. I read them, and I will, through my other work, address these questions, or in upcoming webinars I will address. And for those of you who've asked them, if it seems like a question that deserves or that needs, I have time to answer you directly with an email, I will also do that, because I really, really do appreciate everyone's questions very much. All right. Thank you all for being with me so much. Yeah, you guys are beautiful and adorable and amazing. And every time I'm astounded by the new information that comes out. Who would have thought that the Dharma matrix is like a living entity that has this whole dynamic flow? Oh, guess what? Probably the other ones do too, right? Yeah, because of course these principles extend. So that was huge. That was a huge realization in this webinar. Thank you very much, everyone, for being with me and for being part of this ever evolving process of the growth of energy healing through our collective intent upon it. I love you all dearly, and I look forward to seeing you at the next webinar, as many as can make it. God bless. See you soon. Bye.